The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. The U.S. Department of Education, led by none other than maybe the most unqualified person in Trump's cabinet, Betsy DeVos, is going to cancel $150 million of student loans. This is going to impact about 15,000 federal student loan borrowers. The Education Department emailed borrowers starting last Friday to inform them that some or all of their federal debt is going to be discharged in the next 30 to 90 days. And the student loan borrowers all qualify for automatic closed school discharge. And the borrowers must have attended a college that closed between November 1, 2013 and December 4, 2015. Half of the borrowers attended Corinthian Colleges Incorporated, a large for-profit institution which closed in April of 2015. And so the idea here is to provide relief for people who were enrolled when the school closed, withdrew not more than 120 days before it closed, or, if approved, withdrew more than 120 days before the school closed and didn't enroll at another eligible school within 3 years. So, you know, they went back and forth on this a few times, Pat, and ultimately they're doing this. And it's, you know, everything is more complicated than it is often made out to be. It's the right decision to do student loan forgiveness. This particular student loan forgiveness is too narrowly targeted to really address the broader group of people who, I would argue, deserve to have student loans forgiven. This is the right decision by Donald Trump's Secretary of Education, despite the fact that overall she's an absolutely disastrous Secretary of Education. So there's no, you need to be able to get into the nuance and the details of this rather than saying this is good and Betsy DeVos is good, or this is bad and she's bad, or this is good but she's bad. There are many layers to this.
I think that there are two decent arguments when it comes to being against the student loan forgiveness. One is that these people are adults and they consciously made this decision to go to a for-profit college, and they took that bet and it failed them. The school ended up closing down. Well, that doesn't really hold up because it sounds like there are elements of fraud in that, and you can't actually make a legitimate transaction if someone is lying to you, because that's theft, that's fraud at the end of the day. So I don't think that one holds up. And then the other contention would be that it's not the for-profit colleges who are reimbursing the money. That's coming from taxpayers. So why should we as a society have to foot the bill for such a thing? And I don't have the best response to that. I think it should be the for-profit colleges who are held accountable, but they're all closed up now. So what can you do?
Well, there's a couple different arguments that could be made. Those are good points. As far as it's the colleges that screwed the kids, why is it the government that now has to pay them back? Part of the issue is not over the colleges. So when you're talking about federally guaranteed student loans that are effectively entitlements that anybody can get, you can make the case that the government should be in there as some kind of arbiter, working to ensure that they are not giving easy access to student loan money for schools that are effectively scams. So that would be a way to attribute some responsibility to the government on this. But not everybody sort of agrees with that. I think the issues around student lending are so much bigger than just scam for-profit colleges that this is really important, and it's going to make a lot of people's lives significantly better. But the cost of college is sort of a meta issue that has to be dealt with like yesterday, and it's not being dealt with.
Yeah, and it's not helpful when you have people like Betsy DeVos at the head of the Department of Education who are completely opposed to the goals set out by those organizations, by those agencies. Like, she's going to, at the end of the day, be in support of these for-profit colleges and pretty much any sort of private industry because that directly benefits her.
Let's talk a little bit about loneliness. There's a new study that talks about the periods in the lives of Americans when loneliness seems to peak. And there are 3 such periods of self-reported peak loneliness in people's lives: late 20s, mid 50s, and then late 80s. This seems to make some sense to me. So late 20s is when a lot of people start to disconnect from the networks that they built during college, people start spreading out. And the older you get, and once you get into your late 20s and you move, it becomes much harder to sort of make friends than it was when you were a kid or in high school or college. So late 20s makes a lot of sense to me. Mid-50s also makes sense to me because it seems as though part of that loneliness could be attributed to sort of like empty nest syndrome, where a lot of people in their mid-50s, mid to late 50s, have kids who move away to go to college, and they may then realize that they've not kept up with many social connections that maybe they built connected to their children, the parents of children, or whatever else. So that kind of makes sense, combined with maybe career transition or other things that could be going on in mid 50s. And then late 80s, it seems a lot of the people you know that are your peers start to die. So for me, these three peaks make a lot of sense, Pat.
I think the list makes total sense. In your late 20s, you tend to pull away socially. You don't go to the bars as much as you did when you were in your early 20s. You don't party as much as you did when you were younger. And also, I think that's a period of time where people's career trajectories start to take off. So if you're not experiencing that, but some of your peers are, that could cause some depression, maybe cause you to turn inwards a little bit and not have as good of a social life. Also, in the later age groups, like mid-50s, you could be going through divorce. I think your point about how you have kids who are now out of the house, that stands up as well. And you could just be going through a midlife crisis. And then late 80s makes sense too, because many of your friends are dying off, unfortunately, and hopefully you have some kids who are willing to visit you every now and then, but that's not always the case.
Not always the case. And, there is this dynamic in the United States that is existing more and more in other countries as well, but not nearly as much. And part of it's just the U.S. being such a huge country, but part of it is cultural, of people moving sometimes very far from where they grew up. I mean, I have a lot of friends from Western Massachusetts who live on the West Coast. I have a lot of friends from Western Massachusetts who are living in Europe, and they might see their parents and their old friends from high school once a year in some cases, sometimes a little more as far as the parents are concerned. And that is also a cultural thing. Also, this seems to be more of a problem for men as they age than women. Men, for a variety of different reasons, which we could talk about, seeming to experience loneliness at a higher degree than women at different points in their lives. Sort of a depressing study, but not an altogether surprising one. Send me your thoughts about it if you have any. Last thing I want to touch on, this is an interesting story out of Canada. In Windsor, Canada, back in 2013, the council voted 8-3 to remove fluoride from their tap water. Now, the different people, but the same Windsor Council has voted 8-3 to put fluoride back into the water. And fluoride in water is one of those topics that has a very clear sort of medical opinion, but then it also is ripe and often the subject of many different conspiracy theories, including that fluoride in drinking water can make people gay, or it can turn frogs gay, I think was one such conspiracy theory from Alex Jones, that it can be a sort of mind control stuff, and there are other oppositions that we've seen to fluoride in water. But the data is pretty clear, Pat, that it does seem, particularly for people who may not be visiting dentists regularly, to improve tooth health, and that's a good thing. And so Windsor is saying, it wasn't a good idea to remove the fluoride. We're going to put it back in. Yeah,
people against fluoride in the water claim that it puts you at more risk of cancer, or that fluoride is bad for brain development. And studies don't tend to back that up. I think that people who buy into these ideas are likely those who also think that GMOs are harmful to health and think that vaccinations are harmful to health. I think that's the same pool of people, don't you?
I think that there is a lot of overlap between those groups, but I don't want to put them all in one boat, because it's very interesting that you would think that the principles that might make someone anti-GMO on the basis of being GMO would be similar to those that make someone anti-vaccine. But there's a lot of people who are against one and not the other. And usually they frame it as, no, that's because I understand that this is the one we should be against, but this other one is actually okay. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of the same type of thinking that goes into it. Although there are definitely, if we imagine a Venn diagram of people with these beliefs, anti-vaxxer, anti-GMO, anti-fluoride have an overlap, but there's a lot of areas where they don't. How do we do today, Pat, on the tech side? I feel like it was an even better day than yesterday, although I don't know what's going on outside this room that I'm using to film the show this week. It's very, very loud out there. It sounds like a party.
Yeah, during the regular show, I didn't notice it that much, which is probably for the best. But now I can hear it just a little bit. It kind of sounds like we're eavesdropping. I wonder what they're talking about in that other room.
I know it. Maybe there's a networking event or something. I'm at a co-working space out in Western Massachusetts where I have a bunch of business and personal things to attend to this week in advance of the long weekend holiday. And it's a great place, fast enough internet for what we need to do, and it's generally been working well. I wish the room was a little more soundproof for sure, but I think it's worked, and we're dealing with the 0.4 second delay that Pat and I are experiencing, and overall can't really complain, and just a couple more shows to go this week with this setup. And you know what's interesting, Pat? I don't want to ignore the production quality of the show. Like, it matters. I want the show to look and sound as good as possible. But it's really interesting when I just show up somewhere like this room and do a show, and then we look at the data in terms of downloads and YouTube views and viewer comments and all that stuff from yesterday. And it's exactly the same. And that's when I start to wonder, like, what if I just had a mic and a webcam and sat in a basement? Would we do just as well? And I think the answer is no. I think it's that if the production quality of the show is generally and reliably good, these departures from it aren't hugely damaging. But like, if this was the show every day, I think it would be a problem for us.
I think so too. And there are so many variables when it comes to how many views you get on a particular day, like what type of news stories we're covering, how interesting the thumbnails and the titles are. I think that's a big deal too. But I don't think your retention would be the same if you were just filming in a basement every day. Although that wallpaper behind you, that's quite nice. We maybe should adopt that for our day-to-day studio setup.
Yeah, my options were, so there's one wall which just has like a million light switches and HVAC stuff on it, so I can't use that one. Two other walls are just bright green, like green screen colored, but they're not meant to be a green screen. And then there's this wall. So I decided this was the wall to use. Although maybe as a joke tomorrow I'll use the green wall. Although I don't think so, because it'll look really, really weird. So this is the backdrop for another couple of days. Thanks for joining me. New members, new patrons, new YouTube subscribers, all of that stuff. New program tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.